So welcome everybody for kind of the second session that we've hosted now with Paul. Yesterday we did a bit on cash flows and thinking about what you need to do immediately out of the gates considering the crisis we're in. And right now it's really exciting because it's about pivoting and innovation and really looking at once you solidify your base, what are you going to be able to do moving forward? And for those that don't know me, I'm Michael Sanderson. I'm the director of the Entrepreneurship Center here at SMU. And as a reminder, we're going to start hosting these kinds of webinars on an ongoing basis with our amazing partners like Paul and mentors that can offer this great advice. And in addition, right now, any of you businesses that are facing challenges, we've opened up our coaching program to free strategy sessions. So you can simply go to our website, book a session at any time. The calendar moves out beyond, I think, a week at a time. And we've actually partnered with one of our entrepreneurs in residence, Shannon Susko, who has coaches from around the world that are trained in her program that will meet with you one-on-one in addition to members from our own team and give you advice on what you're facing right now. So please feel free to take advantage of that as well. But we're very fortunate to have Paul with us here today. So the way it'll work is Paul's got a bit of a deck he's going to walk you through, give you some tips on what you want to look at when you're innovating and pivoting at this time. And if you have questions, please throw them in the chat window. I do have some questions that have been sent ahead of time. I'll be monitoring those and we'll try and get them in as he's presenting, but we'll definitely make time at the end of the session. And then we'll talk about kind of next steps moving forward at the end of the session as well. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the esteemed Paul LeBlanc.
Thank you, His Lordship. I appreciate that. Welcome everybody. As Michael alluded to, we did this yesterday at 3:30, and the topic of conversation was around, the two major strategies you need to consider in your business right now. One being strong defense, which I think most of you by now, if you're still in business, have probably done a great job of in protecting your house. But what a lot of people are not thinking about is a strong offense at this point. It feels strange to consider how to grow your business in a time with such significant headwinds, and a lot of businesses are shut down or paralyzed indefinitely. But there's a lot more on today's session than there were yesterday. So I think I would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit about what we talked about yesterday, obviously paraphrased. And for those that want it, there's a video that's going to be, I think, uploaded at St. Mary's website, the Entrepreneurship Center, showcasing yesterday in more detail. But moving to a pivot, which is kind of the topic of this call, you can't really consider a pivot until you've taken care of your house. So I would be a bit remiss not to recover some of that ground in just a quick 5 minutes, and then move on to the topic at hand, which is finding opportunities to pivot. So I'm going to share my screen here and get myself off the beach, and hopefully this goes okay. Is that sharing okay there now? Yeah. Just give me a nod. Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you. All right. So everyone can see that okay. So see, it's keeping with the beach theme of the surf is up. So it's funny, this is a quote that I found long before COVID hit. And for anybody that's in business that I counsel, a lot of people have a lot of problems and they're almost omnipresent. And one of the things that, after doing this for a few years as an entrepreneur, that I've become accustomed to is the notion of this quote: "We must free ourselves from the hope that the sea will ever rest, and we must learn to sail in the high winds." I mean, that's really life as an entrepreneur. And if that's the life you've subscribed to when you're in business, hold on to your hats, because that's just what life is like. It's just an endless experience between calm seas and rough winds. And right now we're in a fucking hurricane. So that's for certain. And, there's that being said, I want to start where I ended yesterday, with a little bit of hope, in that, this is not going to last. This is not the first economic crisis that the world has ever seen. It's not going to be the last. And I know many of you right now are feeling immobilized and feeling like a failure and feeling like you could have done things differently, and you feel like this is never going to end, but it will end. And sometimes a bit of advice that a friend gave to me long and ever ago that really stuck with me, that I was going through a really tough time in opening one of the businesses I was a part of back in 2008 at the foot of the last recession. I had moved to Toronto with my family and was trying to secure business, and had all kinds of expenses burning up, and I was in really bad shape mentally. And someone said to me, sometimes it's just okay to tread water. And that really stuck with me. And sometimes in life and in business, when, if you're in business, you're a progressive person and a progressive thinker. And if you're not going forward, you feel like you're going backwards. But sometimes it's okay to just tread water. And I feel like this is one of those times. So hopefully that'll give you some of the comfort that it's given me. That being said, without a doubt, this is a time of war in business. There is such an immediate and global reaction to things that are happening that we're all a part of. Layoffs happening, uncertainty, decision making that we all have to make, regardless of whether you're a startup or you're a multi-billion-dollar business, and everything in between. This is one of the more interesting times to be in business. And really, there are two ways to look at it. First of all, your attitude is not going to change, the situation that we find ourselves in. So you may as well resign yourself to the fact that this is a pretty interesting time to be an entrepreneur, and lean into it, and try to be creative with your thinking as opposed to become paralyzed. I mean, by the fact that everyone's on this call, most of you, I think, would be the type of people that are here to find solutions and are here to progress as business people. So kudos to you for that. But your mental game, I think, has got to be on point, because not only strategically do you got to fight your way through this, but you've got to maintain your sanity at the same time. So just to recap a little bit, there's two modes that you have to consider in business right now. The first is that you're in defense mode. And I think that's what everyone, when they realize the extent and significance and magnitude of this crisis, and especially when it landed on these shores, and everyone realized that, things were shutting down and the world was becoming paralyzed and immobilized, and, all these things that were happening, everyone turned rightfully internally, and they went into a defense mode. And they started thinking about their business and how to keep it alive when revenues have come to a stop. And that was the right mode. Yesterday's conversation was in great detail talking about these things that you should be considering. And if you haven't done this yet, you take a look at the video from yesterday, but also these were the quick recaps that I have to go over before I can say, hey, go innovate. Because if you haven't done this yet, you're leaving yourself vulnerable to having cost overruns and not being in business. So very quickly, we talked yesterday about scenario planning, focusing on different revenue outcomes in drops in revenue. It could be 10%, it could be 40%, it could be 80%, it could be 100%. But the other factor you have to apply to that is time. How long is this going to persist for? So it's one thing to batten down the hatches entirely for 2 months. It's quite another thing to be able to do that and keep food on the table for 4 months. So running those scenario plans, both in a number of different trajectories with revenue and time, is a really important exercise you have to go through right now. If a lot of people I know haven't done forecasting before, you absolutely have to do revenue forecasting. And on top of that, you have to do it much more frequently than you're used to. A lot of businesses don't do it. If you don't, you really need to take that up as a best practice. In the best of times, in the worst of times, you need to be doing this on a weekly basis. What is your revenue forecast looking like? Getting all key inputs from your executive team or your staff. Planning for more COVID peaks. I think that there's a general sentiment that this wave is going to come over us and then it's going to pass and life's going to return to some semblance of normalcy. That's not the information that I have, and I've got a lot of really great resources that I have access to. They're saying that this is going to come in waves. So this is wave one right now. I was talking to Dr. John Gillis last night, who's a very good friend of mine. He works in the ER room. He said that the peak in Atlantic Canada is going to be within the next 2 to 3 week time frame, and then it's going to tail off. Life will return to some form of new normalcy with social distancing continuing, but then a second wave is going to come, and then the third wave is going to come. And I shared a slide from McGinnis Cooper yesterday articulating when the estimates of those waves are. And why that's important to you is that your business is under siege right now, and though you may go back to business again in some form of kind of a new norm, it may go back into social isolation again in wave 2 and then in wave 3. Not as drastic as now, but understand that there might be more hits to your business going forward, and you have to plan for that. Obviously, cash and liquidity is king, making sure that you convert as much to cash as humanly possible. Things like your accounts receivable strategy, making sure your invoicing is current and up to date, and even your WIP is being billed out on time because customers are holding off on payments. And that you have a good line of credit. There's lots of great government programs, and I talked about this yesterday with banks being able to offer, no questions asked, 10% more on your lines of credit, and also extending lines of credit for, for certain companies that make sense. We talked about deferrals yesterday, getting your rent deferred. A lot of the real estate, leaders around the province are willing to defer rent. That doesn't mean they're going to forgive it, but it means that they'll renegotiate when that rent gets paid in a different format at some point in time later. Loans and leases, same thing. And then, of course, expense reduction, going through all your GLs and making sure that you're, reducing your expenses every which way humanly possible, including possibly layoffs. And then, of course, understanding the ever-changing landscape with the government situation and the emergency programs that are being updated literally on a daily basis. There was another major announcement yesterday, and St. Mary's has got access to a lot of the condensed versions of interpreting what the government programs are that are out there. So if you reach out to Val or Michael or put your email in there, I'm sure they'll be happy to send that along to you. So that's kind of what yesterday talked about. We did go into offense mode a little bit yesterday. We talked about making good use of time. So if you're in one of those businesses that's taken up the emergency measures grant from the government and 75% of your payrolls being compensated, you chose to keep people around, though your revenue has taken a hit, you might find yourself with a bit of time right now. And making use of that time is critically important. The amount of entrepreneurs that have said, shit, I wish I had more time to work on this during the busiest of times. Well, you do. So fix your ERP systems, fix your accounting systems, fix your payroll, fix your sales inputs, create structure that you never had time to create before. Make good use of time, because we will emerge from this, and you want to make sure that you've got as healthy as you possibly can as a business for the time when the world turns back on again. I love this saying, never waste a good crisis. For me, this is a philosophical, a thought process that applies to whether you have cancer or you have a death in the family or you have a crisis that's in front of you. A lot of people look at that as a glass half empty moment. This is an opportunity to look at it as glass half full. And I know that's hard to say when revenues are being slashed, but boy, it's a neat time to be an entrepreneur. And reflecting on going into this crisis, what would you have done differently if I could have given you a year back, knowing this is going to be the extent of the crisis? It sharpens your skills, it hones your senses, it makes you a better business person. So reflect on that question and think about that, because this is probably not, given the faces I see on this call, this is not the last time you're going to go through this. So understanding that moving forward, I think, is really critical. So the topic for today is a conversation that I wanted to have around how to innovate and pivot. I wish we were all live, because I could ask with a show of hands how many of you have had your revenue go to a dead stop, versus how many of you are treading water and how many of you have taken a hit. I'm betting almost everybody on this call is doing worse off from a revenue perspective than they were a month or two ago. And that's likely to persist. So part of the offensive strategy, in my opinion, is you can sit back and protect your house and cut all your costs and then stick your head in the sand and ostrich for a while and hope that when you pull it back out again that the world has changed. In fact, that's what I would argue most companies are doing and most business people are doing right now. But you have a real interesting opportunity to reshape the situation that you're in right now, to innovate and pivot. You might find yourself in a business today, and that's likely just through circumstance and happenstance. But if things had been different, you could be in a completely different business right now if a conversation had come at a different time, and things that had happened as they were. You're all business people. You have the opportunity to turn your business and make change. And so I just tried to give some thought to, what are the 10 steps that, me and some of the businesses that I'm a part of are considering right now to mobilize and possibly pivot and God forbid thrive through an opportunity like this. The first is, and Michael, I don't know where I got that picture from. I don't know if it was off your Facebook or where that came from, but the first one is, what are you good at now? So I think you and your team, and consider even those that you've laid off. I mean, people that have laid off that you've laid off, understand that this is not your fault. It's not, the business's fault. This is purely a circumstance of the world economy and the pandemic that's put everyone in this situation. Engage your staff. We talked about this a bit yesterday. The ones who aren't with you now, share these ideas with them, because they still want to contribute. They still have heart for your company, and they're still counting the days that they can come back and return. So don't treat them like lepers and stop the communication. Then keep communicating with them, and even make them a part of this process. They, stretch their brain at a time when all they're doing is, trying to fight the liquor store lineups and find things for their kids to do. So the first question you have to reflect on as a group is, what are you good at now? And I would argue the better way to articulate that question might be, what problems do you solve right now as a company? Giving that a lot of thought, and don't think tactically. So for example, and I'll use, my friend Jen as an example. She owns a yoga studio in Fredericton. The wrong answer to that question is, we provide yoga, classes. No, you don't. And I think Jen's better than anyone if I were to ask her, and unmute you. You talk about long hugs with your people, and it's such a mental, release for people. And you were very passionate about what your yoga studio did at a philosophical level for people. And that's the way to answer this question. What are you good at in terms of offering? And then when you're able to answer that question, you now have to reshape your company into creating a culture of innovation. If your business has been around for a while, it's like a business that's on a treadmill, and it's kind of going in one direction, and that's the way people have thought about it for eons. You're asking people to think differently, and you're asking people to consider how to innovate and how to think differently about offering a new value proposition based on kind of what you were good at before. You have customers, you have skilled people, you have probably products and services, understanding what the genesis of those things are, and then foreshadowing this thought process with your culture that, look, we need to be a culture of innovation. If we're going to pivot, create a special task force. If you got half of your staff busy doing kind of the old world, and you have time in your hands for the other half, create this culture and articulate to them exactly what you're trying to do in a pivot, and grab more land at a time that's very difficult to do. Even giving them some examples, having a conversation. There's lots of articles out there right now, and I'll go through examples at the end of this, where companies have pivoted literally on a dime. And it's not to say that a restaurant company is now a courier company, but companies have figured different ways of reaching their customers and continuing to solve problems for them based on what they were good at before. So creating this culture of innovation, I think, is a really important step in the process to change people's mindsets from, what they were used to be good, what they were used to being adding value versus what you need from them now. The third point is, to build structures for collaboration and idea exchange. The times are different now, and you can't sit yourself in a war room with a whiteboard and do this. So you have to use the tools that are so readily available to you. This is one of them. Zoom is very profound. Having Dropbox or Google hard drives or using Google Sheets, or it's infinitely easy to use, but having those Hangouts set up and using the technology that you have to kind of create this ecosystem where people can, idea exchange and add value to and change and edit and update is really important. So that's more a conversation around your tools in order to set the process up for idea exchange. The other thing I'll say on that before I leave this thought is setting a cadence for the meetings to share these ideas and shape them. this is not something that you can just do on the fly. So, you know, setting up strategy meetings twice a week where you continue the thought, you leave action items. And if I've tasked, you know, Jen with one or two of the thought processes that she knows exactly what she has to do by the time we come back together and you know, and have results. So making sure that there's actionables at the bottom of the page and who's doing what by when. And you know, this is, keep in mind, this is warfare. So you have to treat it as such, and you got to be very definitive with what your expectations are for people and their contributions. You know, this idea, this concept obviously would fail abundantly if you didn't have conversations with your customers. So I would argue even now, you know, moving this one to number 3, talking to your customers before you even start the concept of ideation. You know, the biggest question you need to ask your customers now is, what is keeping you up at night? And of course, that's through the filter of what it was that you used to offer as a product or a service in the past. What are they having a hard time accessing? And what's life like for them right now, you know, without your product or your service? So understanding from them where those gaps are will illuminate your path to innovation and pivoting. Of course, there's going to be lots of ideas. You know, Michael and I were just chewing the fat before we got on this session. And here's an example. Michael said, you know, maybe at the end of this call, we can put people together in teams to work in real time on some of the problems. And I said, that's a great idea. Maybe another idea or a way to pivot that is to, for those that are interested in creating a little forum out of the group that's on the call. I don't know how many are on here right now. I can't really see, but I don't know. So there's 30 or 40. Maybe you put together 5 within an industry. If you're in printing or you're in retail or you're in fitness or you're whatever, put a little cohort together and allow them to go through this process. And maybe, you know, through the St. Mary's Idea Exchange and the Entrepreneurship Center, they can kind of help moderate that process. But that's an example of an idea that got better with more input. And there's no shortage of that. So, you know, putting your ideas together on a page and shortlisting them. You have to be considerate of the revenue modeling attached to it when you're shortlisting your idea. Is it going to make you money? Do you have the ability to deliver on it? Is that something that you can actually facilitate and deliver on? Does it enhance your brand, or does it confuse your market if you're pivoting too far away from your core? And then mobilization planning. Can you actually make this thing happen, or are you going to really struggle with having it manifest? I mean, you have to create some filters, not just I like that idea or I don't. Even a bad idea might get you great money and great margin. So there's some filters you'd have to consider with that. Of course, selecting the winner. You can't do, if you're going to try to be all things to all people, you'll be nothing to all of them. So selecting the one based on the filter set that you've created that makes the most sense. I would suggest strongly you do that as a group so that everyone has a chance to, you know, take the air out of it or inflate it equally. Once you do that, I think it's really important that you test the concept. You don't just go straight to market and, you know, ring up the marketing, you know, wizards and start cranking the idea. This is a new thing for your business. So taking a cluster of users and trying it out on them first, you know, having them break the idea, you know, add value to it, take away from it. Is it too much? Is it too little? So launching it in a micro format just to prove that it's either got the, you know, the ability to take hold and that it could be profitable is really important. And then setting timelines around testing the idea. Number 8, marketing and PR. I will say this. The news is a very dark place right now, as we all know. And it's you know, just sitting in front of the news, they're crying for innovation, and they're crying for new pivots, and they're crying for you know, innovation that's happening in a industry that otherwise would be decimated. So taking your idea when it's ready for the market and going to the news sources and explaining to them the pivot that you made, and attaching marketing to it, going back to your customers and excitedly announcing how you're reinventing yourselves and offering new services and products. That's number 8 is a blast. That's the part that's exceedingly fun, and the world is open to hearing right now. And I would argue PR probably might be more important than marketing. So it's free publicity, and it's believable, and it's shareable, and there's some great opportunities around marketing and PR. Number 9 is sales strategy. So making sure that you're, if you are the salesperson, that you're devoted to getting this up and off the ground, as opposed to just constantly, plugging holes in the leaky boat. And that was the preamble to making sure that the house was well settled first and defended. But getting into sales and actually mobilizing your team behind it with objectives, and it could create all new opportunities. It's not just selling to your existing cohort of customers, and it's not also just selling to your own region. Yeah, if you're moving to a digital format, and I'll use again Jen as an example, if Jen's conducting, an escape for people's day to day and creating wellness opportunities and using yoga as the platform, well, her old market was in Fredericton with people who live maybe 5 kilometers away to go and appreciate that. Well, with this new channel, if you're going digital, why can't you have 1,000? Why can't you be the Peloton of yoga? If anyone knows what Peloton is, I bought the bike and had it shipped to my Toronto office, and they shipped it in parts, so I had to ship it back. So I never had a chance to try it out. But my point is that you may want to rethink, if you're going digital, how your product makes it to market and who your market really is now, which creates, major thriving opportunities. So think of that a bit differently. And then lastly, tracking your success markers throughout this process. I think going into this strategically is as important as implementing it strategically. Asking yourselves at certain milestones, is this actually delivering? So don't just launch the program and assume that it's ticking the box, because it might be short-lived, it might be fleeting. But finding out from people what's missing on this. Again, if I use the yoga studio example, and you're launching this online, if it's a one-way communication, people may say, well, I may as well just do a YouTube because I'm not feeling like I'm a part of the group, in which case you have to switch to a Zoom format where the instructors can see the people and call them out when they're, fat-assing and not delivering the way they need to. So understanding what is working and was not working with your new program track is really important, and continuing to refine it. Is it making money, and is it making margin? Obviously, you're in business to make money, I think most of you. So ensuring that you set out to make revenue and margin off this, and that's actually translating versus, make work that possibly could cost you money. Are your customers responding to it? I even had a thought, can you partner with the old world competitors using their resources and clients? Again, using you're getting a free consultation here, Jen. You could go to every yoga studio in Atlantic Canada and say, hey, let's merge all of our instructors and create multiple classes under one big brand, and send your customers to this format, and we'll all do this together. Where people who traditionally might have been a competitor to you, if you've cracked the nut and done it a different way, you might actually become allies through this process as well. It's just a different way to think about it. And then lastly, what I talked about was just thinking beyond the local market. If you're going to go digital, your traditional market, your addressable market might have grown exponentially, and don't lose track of that. So that is my, and I'm in 4 minutes early. That's my kind of the top 10. Michael, do you want to stop and just chat back and forth, or have there been questions in there? Because I've got some examples that I can walk people through that might be helpful.
Yeah, maybe we'll open to some questions on a couple of those that I know we'll be pressing first, and then we'll go into the examples, if that makes sense. So I've got the chat open. So yeah, Levi just posted something. So in these changing times, what resources are you trusting that they can access? And what are the opportunities out there?
So you're talking about, Levi, good to see you, by the way, virtually. You're talking about what resources are we trusting. So I'm in a group called YPO, which is a great, organization with lots of great contacts. And we've had, global chief economists in from RBC last week. We've had guys like Colin McDonald talking to us. Today we had the heads of KPMG across Canada giving us a sense of, so, I mean, I've got great resources in that, and unfortunately that's not accessible to everyone. I know it doesn't do you any good, but there's been a lot of resource sharing within that organization that's been very helpful. The one that keeps coming up, no disrespect to St. Mary's, is the Harvard Business Review. So they've got a really great portal full of tons of great knowledge. They've got a COVID page set up specifically for almost everything imaginable within business, from scaling to how to deal with work from home, to stress, to, all kinds of different things. So I use that. that quite a bit. And then just honestly, my network. You trust your network, right? So people that are sending things through to me, I know the Chamber of Halifax Chamber, that is, has got a resource center filled with interpretations of all the different government programs that are out there. Honestly, I think at this point, the biggest bit of advice I can give you is this, that there are networks of people out there that are struggling the same way you are. And on this call, I can now see there's 35 participants that are all struggling in their own way, shape, and form. And yes, everyone's independently coming in to see two people talk back and forth, but, you know, looking at each other and sharing this, and maybe St. Mary's, you know, you guys can create a bit of a database and share that with everyone if you're open to it, because we can create little communities within this that can you know, interpret information and share information. We have a what's it called, a WhatsApp chat. Let me see here yeah, WhatsApp with our YPO group. Get a bunch of people that you know are in your network and you trust the opinions of, and create a WhatsApp chat group and just bounce ideas. That thing goes off all day long. Check out this resource. Look at this. There's, you know, this person or this bit of information. They're sharing PDFs. What did you guys do about banks, and who got the best interest rate, and what about your deferrals? And so creating a network either through groups like this or through networks of your own, I think is extremely powerful, as trying to figure this stuff out by yourself. I see Kim says here, hi Kim, HBR, what's HBR?
The Harvard Business Review there.
Oh yeah, okay, right, yeah. I just said that, okay. So, she said it this way, I said it that way.
So some questions were sent before, and I think they tie under some of the topics, so we'll start kind of throwing some of those out, and then as you have more questions, throw them in. But yeah, and we'll at the end we'll kind of talk. I think there is a lot of opportunity here for the Entrepreneurship Center to build out a network here and bring people together, and we'll talk more about that at the end. So when you go back to your first tip, Paul, you know, what are we good at now? And people are gonna be coming up with ideas, but sometimes these ideas that you come up with, you don't have the resources in-house right now. You're like, oh, this is a great idea, but we're missing an element. How do they approach the HR side of it in this virtual environment? Because, you know, the process for onboarding someone into your organization when your organization is you in a square box on your screen is obviously different. And how do you make sure you're bringing in the right people? So any tips on how that might play out, or what approach they can use?
Yeah, you're saying if they're not in-house, right?
Yeah. So, you know, what you're good at now, you just don't have some of those skills. So you might actually need to hire somebody. How would you even approach that in this kind of environment?
Yeah, we had in YPO last week, we had a labor law. Actually, I think it was this week. Every week feels like last week at this point. But we had Stuart McKelvey, New Brunswick and Nova Scotia, talking about the implications of labor law at this point in time. And it was a fascinating conversation. But one of the questions was, if I'm in the midst of making layoffs in traditional roles, but I have to hire for new roles, what are the implications for that? And I think, you know, by the way, I'm not a labor lawyer, but that was my interpretation of what he said. So you'll have to check this for yourselves. But that's okay. It's if it's different roles, it's something else entirely. So if you've had to make layoffs, you don't necessarily have to hire the same people back that don't have the skill sets that you need moving forward. And honestly, it's just you know, look, the good and the bad news is there is a lot of people. There was 1 million people that filed for unemployment, and I can't imagine that they were all bad, right? So there's an awful lot of people that are out there that you can get access to and find, and using your social networks. I would just say you have to be really articulate with what it is that you're looking for in that skill set, and don't settle. But the amount of people that are out there looking for people to go to war with is certainly a lot more than it was 2 months ago. So I would think that there'd be lots of them out there.
Awesome. And so, you know, moving on from that, you talked, I love that second point about culture and creating that innovation culture. Any tips on for the owners, how to manage culture though in this online environment? You know, for some people, they've never used Zoom before, they've never worked in a virtual environment, yet now you have to manage a whole organization and try and keep that culture that you had where you guys were all going out for Friday night drinks and stuff. So any tips on being able to, just developing this new culture, but even managing that culture?
Yeah, I mean, that I think is the conversation that's worth, another hour unto itself, is just managing the work from home, and then the implications of stress and kids, hanging off your ear, and dogs barking, and the morale and the lack of connectivity, and in particular, if you've been laid off, the lack of connectivity. So a couple tidbits that I see working really well are Friday socials, both with people that are in your organization or ones that you had to lay off. Every Friday at 5 o'clock, everyone jumps on Zoom and they have a glass of wine together. You create a couple icebreakers for people to answer, 1 minute, depending on how many people are on the call. But hey, what's the best? We did this last week. What's the best thing to come out of COVID? We always try to keep the conversations positive as opposed to, negatively spun. So I think moments like that are true, human moments. The biggest bit of advice I would give to cultures right now is to over communicate. People, in particular, another bit of advice that I was giving companies is, if you have to lay off, which I expect many of us have had to do it fast, and do it deep, and do it once. Don't do it, I'm going to wait and see this week. I'm going to trim 10% this week, and then maybe next week we'll see what happens with the government programs. We'll do another 10%. Take the worst case scenario, cut once, cut deep, and let people know that, for as far as unless things change or this thing prolongs for an unforeseen period of time, otherwise people are just wigging out all the time. Like, am I going to be here? I can't really focus on my job. Should I be looking for a job? And I think that's, I know it's a very negative thing, but it's something that I think will create positivity within a culture. And things like this, like just creating this innovation concept with people. Like, even if you're shut down right now, re-engaging with your people and saying, look, guys, we want to get you back to work as fast as humanly possible. As a matter of fact, we want to thrive in the midst of this. Let's come up with these ideas together. People love to contribute to businesses. That's why Dragon's Den is such a phenomenally, fun show to watch. Everyone sees themselves as a bit of an entrepreneur, but the majority of the people aren't, though they have opinions on everything. So I think things like that is going to be really important. And then above all, just be honest with people. You don't have to tell them what your finances are and all that other stuff, but you can let them know the things that you're doing to deal with the headwinds that are in front of you. Everyone's adults, treat them like adults. Don't put them in the dark and feed them shit. So.
Excellent. And I saw Matt threw in a follow-up to that, those of us with larger staff and stuff, but what about those sole operators, individuals who are on their own, that are running these businesses that are even more isolated? What should they be doing to make sure they're getting out there and removing some of that isolation?
Yeah, what I was doing? I was having a man moment there. I was trying to listen to you and read the question at the same time, and I didn't see either. So which question is it, Matt? Is it the one that's
Matt McPhee, it's this one right above Kim's, just on the reverse of maintaining large cultures, how the sole operators should kind of look at it, being even more isolated.
Being a sole owner operator is really difficult. The best advice I can give owner operators is to get attached to a bigger culture. SMU can build those, other networks can build them. There's chambers of commerce. And I don't mean big cultures. I don't mean attach yourself to an organization that's got 1,000 members, because then you're still faceless and nameless. Find cultures, find cults that you can hang out with and you can bounce ideas off of. Even these days, it's funny, I was on a call this morning and they were talking about how competitive barriers are dropping. People you once saw as competition, you're both in the quicksand together, and all of a sudden, how do we get out of this together? Maybe it's not such a bad thing to approach your competitors, even in different geographic markets, and say, let's create a group. I know YPO did it. They created a manufacturing group to deal with the amount of need that the federal government has with masks and PPEs and all that stuff. And they're all now bidding together and going, okay, you guys can do this part of the component, we'll do this part of the component. So collaboration as an owner or operator, I think is, honestly, it's oxygen. You need it in business.
Awesome. So when we look at one of your other points, on point 4, you talked about talking to your customers, which of course is music to our ears at the Entrepreneurship Center. That's a big element of what we help companies do in getting out there and validating. But a great question came through from Jen, specific to her yoga studio, which that she had sent earlier online, which was, what about when you're trying to find these new customers? Like, so you've pivoted, but that's a different customer segment. How are we getting out there online to get these new customers, and what are some strategies that they should be undertaking?
Jen, remember that? I even sent you an email ahead of time. I'm glad you asked that question. So one of the examples that I have found riveting is my buddy Mabdu here, who's up on the screen too from me. He has a startup, and I've been talking to Mabdu over the last couple of years, or last year in particular, a lot about his business model. And this is one of the examples I wanted to cite of I thought, an incredible pivot that I personally didn't even see coming. But his old business model was an old, meaning like 3 weeks ago, by the way, which was brilliant. Was for anybody that plays sports right now. I know, Kevin, you're a ferocious soccer player. I can tell. You want to go out on a Friday night and go play soccer, but you don't know where or who's hosting or what the caliber of the teams are like or any of that. So he's built an app that matches organizers with players, and it's a super cool app across every sport: soccer, football, you name it. I thought it was absolutely brilliant, and Mabdu launched his company, had the big official launch at Volta Labs the Wednesday before the Friday that the world caught on fire. So timing, very, very unfortunate for everybody, but certainly for a startup that was just about to go take the world by storm when no one was allowed to play sports anymore, right? So anyway, it's a good story you're going to tell your grandchildren. So he called me back and we were chatting, and now he's pivoted into, he said, all these people that used to put on fitness classes now don't have access to training anymore, right? So you were either at a gym, you're doing bar class, you're doing yoga, you're doing whatever. You have this, loyal following, and what most people are doing is giving their stuff away for free. Why not use our application to collect the customers, publish your yoga class, and allow the capture of the revenue, and basically apply your business model against people that want to stream to, to places all over the world. So he's pivoting, and I think by, you can give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down here, Mabdu, but I think by next week, you're starting your beta with a number of different outposts to focus on the fitness. That for me is an absolutely fucking brilliant pivot. So you went from something where it was absolute crisis, you hit the wall dead on, and now all of a sudden, within 2-3 weeks, he's reinvented his business model to fill a need that existed in a different space. I found that absolutely fascinating. One of the best examples that I can give. So hopefully, Kevin's pivoted to golf, he tells me. I don't blame you, but you're by yourself on a golf course. So yeah, I think that's an excellent idea. Jen, then I wanted to connect you too, because that's a match made in heaven, in my opinion. And he's a hugger, so it's perfect.
So Kim McDonald has a good follow-up on that, Paul, that she just posted. You see so much now being offered for free to take advantage of these opportunities, but not every company can live for that model that long. So what are your thoughts on that, on offering?
Yeah, it's a great question, Kim, but it's funny. The internet is a place where I think, in the beginning, most people got everything for free. It's why everyone knows who Facebook is and no one knows who MySpace is. They came out with a model, they beat them to the punch. It was the exact same delivery, but they put a big price tag on it, and Facebook didn't. And the precedent online has been that you get most of what you want for free. I think the difference is in particular, in the catalyst of this pandemic that we're in right now, that people are understanding that in order to get the services that you had before, you have to pay. And it may not be the same thing. So if I'm used to going to a fitness class and paying, $12 to go in the fitness class, maybe you do it for $6, but there's still value. And the thing I will tell you is this, is that if you're giving things away for free, and here I am, doing the seminar for free, but, excuse me for a minute. But if you're giving stuff away for free, the attributable value is that it's not large. So, I would encourage people strongly that if you've been providing value in the past and you're going to continue providing it in the online, the worst thing you can do is give it away for free. Now, it's one thing to say, let's try this just to prove to you that it's still giving you the value that you had before for a finite amount of time. But if I'm paying for something, generally speaking, I feel motivated to attend. I feel motivated to pay attention. I feel motivated to, to give the thing all that I can. And I think the people in particular in the next few months are going to become much more accustomed to paying for things online than they're used to, if the value is there.
Yeah, for sure. And what nobody knows is that we've hijacked your Zoom accounts, and we won't let you leave now until you pay for this session upon it. So, just so you know,
I got to pay for it?
Yeah, none of that money goes to you though, Paul, unfortunately.
Money's stupid. Money's overrated.
Oh, great question, Kim. Another question that had come out that was sent in by Karen goes to the number 8 point you had around marketing and PR. And, her question she had emailed prior was, how much should you invest, so you've got these new ideas, how much should you invest in marketing and PR, knowing that this is also a time when we should be conserving cash? So it's like, how do you strike that balance between action and risk mitigation?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I showed a slide yesterday that I have another one I'd rather show, so I'm just going to bring it up right now if I can find it. So here's an interesting slide, just for context. Can you guys all see that okay? Slide popped up. This is an interesting, during the last Great Depression, from the Harvard Business Review, it showcases, can you see my cursor? Is that moving around?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, good. So this is the group of marketers that spent no advertising at all, and they went flat. This is the group of marketers that chose to decrease their advertising, and it goes to show after the recovery how hard it was and how they never came back to even where they were before. And this is for the group of people that advertised throughout the depression and where they ended up at the end of the recession. So there's lots of research that would indicate that shutting advertising down is not the smart thing to do. Now, if you're a smaller company, you probably couldn't afford advertising to begin with, but PR is a beautiful thing. Going to the media, using your own channels, getting third-party influencers to endorse your idea or your program, getting your customers to talk about it. There's lots of ways to do marketing that doesn't cost you anything. And if your idea is good enough, it'll get traction. It'll get traction anyway. So there is a whole conversation I think to be had around marketing in times like this anyway. But my quick advice to you is focus on the cheapest versions of marketing, which is your sales outbounds, your existing customers, and PR. And then spending for marketing would be a last resort. But if it's working, throw gas on the fire and go attract other customers by spending on marketing on it.
Excellent. So one of the other questions that came in, this is more of a general question from Sarah Meany. How do you remain focused and positive on these ideas and goals when every news report you read, everything you're hearing is this is the downfall of the human condition? So how can you stay focused on that, all things considered?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I have what I think is a good answer. Almost everyone you talk to is glass half empty right now. Almost everybody. Businesses, and for good reason, I guess. Business sucks. People are being laid off. You don't know what the hell's going to happen in the next month, 2, 3, 4 months. What's going to happen around? I had a really interesting conversation with my neighbor the other day where I was out washing my car and social distancing, and he's from Syria, and I said, "How are you guys holding up?" And he said, "Oh, not bad at all." And I said, "Really?" He said, "No." He said, "I was in Syria, during the crisis, and we lived inside a house without running water or food for 6 months. Like this is okay." We had Senator Stan Kuchner on last night, who's an incredible mental health resource in Nova Scotia, and he was talking about the and not to get all dark, but the child soldiers in Africa, and the wars that were waged there, and how at the end of that they though having killed each other and killed parents and sisters, they got up and they couldn't wait to go to school, and they were happy again. And I think that everyone has it in them to be happy. Like it's a tough time that we're going through for sure, but being glass half full, what a great time to innovate. Everyone else for the most part, are sticking their head in the sand. That's the truth. So why not take your company and pivot and find the opportunity and the silver lining and share it with your staff? It's contagious. Being glass half full is contagious, and it's a choice that you make. It's an attitude that you have. You can choose one path, the other. I'd encourage you to choose the former, and I think a lot will come from that.
Awesome. Kim posted a follow-up question. Paul, what are your thoughts on doing price reductions during this time, thinking about people's financial difficulties and such?
Yeah, I mean, look, price reductions are happening, and it's almost happening out of a bit of desperation, in particular for restaurants and industries that got decimated as a way of winning people back. And not a lot of people have a lot of money. It's not a bad strategy, provided that it's not diminishing the value of your product, right? Again, back to the point that there's a value equation that's prevalent in business, that you get what you pay for, and if you're discounting so much, the perception of that is going to go with it. I would prefer to augment the services. So, for example, if I own a restaurant, and let's say it's a nighttime restaurant, a lot of people used to go there. I'm going to make this up as I go along. A lot of people used to go there for the ambience. Well, what if I gave 2 candles away and and some nice linens to go with the dinner, and put it in some nice packaging, so that it makes you feel like you've still got the ambience that you so longed for before, as opposed to discounting it by 30%. That's 2 very different experiences for the customer that I would consider. So I would, as opposed to price reduction, I would think about value augmentation instead. I think it's got it leaves people with a better taste.
Nice, great advice. Guillermo just posted, do you have any recommendations for businesses in the sport and outdoor recreation industry sector, with all the parks, beaches, everything being closed? Any thoughts?
Yeah, well, I think Val is in that case, right? Val, you had a nice business model that was getting ready to launch that was squarely in that space, and I know Mobdo did as well. I don't really know what your business is in that space, so I can't speak specifically to that. But what I can say is, you have 2, at least, people on this call, 3, including yourself, that live in that space. Why don't you guys create a little group and spend time talking about how that's confronted all of you, and what pivots each of you might be considering taking to help each other out of this. So, I don't think those parks and beaches are going to open up anytime soon. So I think you guys are all in the same proverbial ship together. So it might be good to share ideas.
Yeah.
I also, Michael, just before we continue, I do have a couple of examples that I wouldn't mind throwing
out.
in.
Right. Yeah, please do share.
Only because it just gives context, because a lot of people are like, hey, well, how do I pivot, and what does a pivot actually mean? So I'm going to go through a couple of them just really quickly. Everyone knows the story of Stanfields. Maybe half of you are wearing them right now. They've been around for quite a long time. John's a friend of mine. He shut his plant down when this hit, and thinking that retail was being shut down completely. And then they started having conversations with government. Now they've opened back up, hired more people than ever, and they're building gowns for the PPE, personal protection equipment for hospitals and whatnot. Amazing pivot. You hear all kinds of stories about liquor companies right now, the microbreweries and brew pubs and whatnot, that are converting to create hand sanitizers because there's such a lack of that in the world right now. I found that amazing. Big companies like Gap, Nike, Zara, Brooks Brothers, even smaller manufacturers are converting their factories to making mask gowns and scrubs. Hotel booking platforms have partnered with hotels to create isolation centers across a number of places right now that have got limited quarantine facilities. I thought this was neat. If anyone's in the restaurant business, there's a company in LA called Every Table. That's a healthy food chain that's shifted to making home deliveries and started a COVID-19 helpline to link its services with schools, senior citizens, and homeless shelters in need of healthy and affordable meals. I thought that was brilliant. Cleaning companies that used to do home cleaning have now switched to sanitation services for businesses so they can keep their people going. We mentioned my friend Mobdo at Bloxo and the pivot that he made. One of the other companies I'm a part of, called Verge Technologies, that does structured cabling, the big structured cabling for commercial buildings and whatnot, as well as security and pro AV services. So we were chatting them this morning, and I said, look, one of the things, the guy that runs this, Mike MacArthur, and I said, Mike, one of the things that's happening right now is everyone that's a professional is now working from home on Zoom, struggling with Wi-Fi. Like the amount of conversations I have with colleagues are like, shut your goddamn iPads off and get off Netflix. And, the bandwidth is getting sucked up because when I'm, freezing up. Well, we know Wi-Fi better than anybody. Why don't we create a service that optimizes Wi-Fi, understand what the telecoms are offering, get the best packages available, and then do remote IT services with, plug this in, move that, do this, do that, and then taking people through, how to optimize Wi-Fi. That's an example of a pivot that's still squarely in the space of what Verge Technologies does, but is staring down exactly a problem that everyone's facing with bandwidth issues. And then lastly, I don't know if there's any restaurants on here at all, but one of the things that I think restaurants are really missing out on is everyone's flipped out about ordering food from a restaurant because what are their sanitation services like? My wife's like wiping down pizza boxes with Lysol. There's nothing more appetizing than the whiff of Lysol as you're biting into a pepperoni pizza. But the worry is that people aren't sanitizing. When you make a phone call to a restaurant, the first thing I would be telling customers is, listen, thank you very much. Just to let you know, here's all the things that we're doing. We're doing this. We're washing our hands. Maybe even setting up a webcam in our kitchen. Go and check. You'll see every 15 minutes our people are, doing this. Changing every aspect of how customers encounter restaurants at every single touch point. Things like the phone call interactions, pickup, delivery, all aspects of packaging. Maybe they come with Lysol wipes in the packaging so people can wipe the boxes down if they feel uncomfortable with that. Delivery people shouldn't be handing it off. They should be dropping it at the door and they should all have gloves on. You have to rethink everything if you're going to be relevant and disarm. And the amount of people that would order back from that restaurant based on that experience, even if the food's shitty, I think would be significant. So I think that's my last example, but I think those are the type of examples that just off the top of my head are fairly profound.
Excellent. We had two other questions that were emailed in. I just want to quickly address them. Ghislain, I think, hopefully I pronounced that correctly.
Ghislain. He's my buddy. I don't know why he just doesn't call me and ask me this.
Yeah, he wants to know, about supporting startups right now, about is it too risky to invest and give, take shares, things like that? And is there a risk with being too opportunist, which actually, I think builds a broader question is, when you're innovating and pivoting, is there, should they be aware and be careful of people seeing that, oh, you're just trying to take advantage of people who are in trouble right now and you're offering this to be able to do that. So yeah, thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't look, no one has to sell shares in their company. So I'm not worried about the second piece. It's not like, someone's going to come in for some discount, massive discount pricing and give up 80% of their company for a buck. It takes a willing buyer and a willing seller. I'm not worried about that. Should you be investing in startups right now? It's a subjective question. The fact of the matter is startups are usually not cash flow positive within the first couple of years anyway. So I don't think that if you have a sound, business model and it makes sense and it's still going to solve a problem when the world goes back to normal. Most startups aren't going to be making major bucks within the first 1, 2, 3, 4 months anyway. They're beta testing. And I'd argue sometimes it's better because people have a lot more time on their hands to play with new technology to begin with. And a lot of the startups are in the tech space. So if your startup is in a traditional space, like I'm going to open a landscape company or worse, a refrigeration repair company where I have to go in someone's house, you might think twice because there's some significant roadblocks to that would affect cash flow and projections and all that stuff. But as it relates to technology, I don't think so. I think there's still lots of capital out there. I just think that there's a lot of overall hesitation because people are just in a fear mode right now, which I think will abate once we get the peak discovered in this crisis.
Excellent. And then the last question came from McGregor and was around specifically around the SHRED program, that as a way to inject liquidity, they had heard that it might be easier now and minimal audit stuff to get involved in SHRED. any thoughts on that. I certainly can add some thoughts as well.
Yeah, I look, there's a lot I don't know about in life, and that's one of the areas I know about the shred credits. We've used them before in different companies. I'm certainly not an expert, and I'm not on the front line of that, so I can't. I'm just out of my league in speaking to whether or not it's busier than it's ever been before because startups are desperate to get the cash in, and everyone's realizing the importance of it. So is there a flood, or is it, they've got extra resources from the government to process things like that, and they're not dotting I's and crossing T's? I don't know. My best advice for you would be to call up a couple companies at Volta or Propel ICT if you're in New Brunswick or wherever you happen to be, and find out from some of the users what the economy feels like.
Yeah, and what I'll throw into that, in my experience with the calls that I've been on around the various government organizations that, that's meeting a few times a week and stuff, is that most government organizations all have the same mandate right now. Help to the best of our ability as fast as we possibly can. And I'm actually shocked to see how fast things are moving. I think, everyone has been shocked to see how quickly this emergency benefit has been applications, these 3-day turnarounds. So my suggestion would be reach out to the department that's in charge of the shred rebate and simply ask them, say, I've got this innovation that I want to get money back for, some R&D. What's the process? I need the liquidity. My general feeling right now is everyone wants to help, and that's the mandate they've received from government. So now's the time to ask and start.
And I would add, and banks. Banks are extremely helpful right now, and they're very, very quick to get things. So if you need a increase in line of credit, or you need to reach your banker, the one thing I'll say is don't hide from your banker in a time like this. If you've got issues, be upfront with them, be honest with them. They're expecting that. They'll punish those that aren't, and they'll help those that are. That's the biggest word I've heard from lots of people in banking. So yeah, and I'll just close by saying, thank you for having me once again. I do appreciate it. I hope it's helpful. I would encourage everyone to drop your email in the chat box, and well, I guess maybe Valerie, you already have the registration details of everyone anyway, but if you're interested, reach out to Valerie in creating some networking amongst peers on this call, and I'm happy to join a couple of them or help along the way with some of them. But just keep your glasses half full. I think we're well on our way through this pandemic. There's good news in the midst of all of this. I think it's a more extremely human time to be alive right now, and I think you guys will all just kind of bear through and lean on each other, and good days are ahead. So I wish you guys all the best.
Awesome. So yeah, so thank you, Paul. We appreciate Paul's given up 2 days in a row here, coming and sharing his expertise and giving advice to all of you business owners. So I think that's fantastic. So just to reiterate what Paul said, we are looking at, we have this virtual entrepreneur network, looking at what we want to do with it. So email Valerie that you're interested in being part of it, and we'll try and match up groups from similar industries, kind of mastermind groups where you can get together, chat with each other, share, and we'll work to help facilitate that information. As well, I'll mention again, there is the coaching opportunity. By all means, reach out. We also have a number of employment-based programs that we run, and we've been working with our partners to make those placements 100% subsidies. So we have co-op placements through SMU, through the RBC Talent Hub. We've got a great program called Accessibility, where we're placing some very vulnerable individuals, people who self-identifying as have disabilities, with organizations, and we will fund 100% of their salary to get them working on some of these innovative ideas and pivots. So make sure you reach out about that as well. So look, we appreciate you being part of this. We're going to continue having these sessions as well, moving forward with a variety of alumni and experts like Paul. So stay in touch.
Michael,
yeah.
If I could just add to, we're looking to host more of these virtual roundtable discussions. So if there are any major topics that we could go into more depth, focus like a whole hour on that topic, then please feel free to email us those ideas and some of those key challenge areas that you're facing right now. And we're going to continue looking for experts in the topic to be able to host more of these virtual roundtable discussions every week. So please keep an eye out on our social media and on our website. We're going to have all the details and information of how you can register for those, the same style as what we just did here. So
awesome.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Enjoy your long weekend.